Hey class, and welcome to week 3 of History of Psychology, the summer edition. As always, I just want to go over a couple important announcements, as well as go over some important topics that you'll be learning about this week. So just here's my kind of rundown of checklist for the week. If anybody would like some clarification, to ask any questions you have at all about exam number 2, or really anything that you learned over week 2, please reach out to me and let me know. I'm happy to help. You'll be happy to know that there's one less chapter this week that you need to read. So really, as we kind of progress, your workload and your reading load should be getting lighter and lighter. So be sure to read chapters 8 through 10, watch any videos that I have posted about these chapters. You'll have exam number 3 that'll be due Sunday at midnight, as well as bookmark number 3. So please keep in mind for bookmark number 3, I know that you guys are used to writing kind of 4 paragraphs each week. For this one, you'll only have to write 3 because we're only covering 3 chapters. So we're going to start off with chapter 8 this week. So typically, if you ask people about the history of psychology, really what people tend to think about is this really being kind of the dawn of psychology and the work of Freud. But we are over halfway done with kind of the chapters, and this is really kind of where most people believe that psychology was kind of born. So we know that that's not true. But I always like to throw out there that typically this is what people think of when we start to talk about the birth or the start of psychology. So where are we in psychology? We are roughly in the years of 1886 to 1938. So the reason why these years are sort of bookends is we're really kind of focusing in on the work of Sigmund Freud and his start of the theory of psychoanalysis. Our chapter really does do a good job at kind of explaining the beginnings of his work, how it started off, as well as the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society. So if you have not heard of the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society, this was really a group of physicians in Vienna that really started their work on therapy and their work on meshing the worlds of medical and psychology and therapy and all of the theories that Freud was coming about. So the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society had a huge role in that. Think of it more as like a club in which different scientists and world-renowned leaders in this area would meet every Wednesday night and really just discuss what's kind of going on, their theories, their patients, and kind of compare and contrast what was going on in their lives and in their practices. Kind of an offshoot that this chapter likes to do is sort of explain the differences between Freud and his followers. So pretty soon into Freud's work, he started having people who disagreed with him. Freud's ideas were really revolutionary in a lot of ways. So people started to disagree in certain areas. The 2 major people that disagreed with him, and they were previously followers of him, are going to be Alfred Adler as well as Carl Jung. Carl Jung and Freud had a very interesting relationship. A lot of people thought that when Freud died, Jung would be kind of the heir apparent and he would kind of take over in Freud's place, but that didn't turn out to be that way at all. What many have considered is like the greatest divorce in psychology history. There was a kind of a major break in the relationship between Jung and Freud, in which they never really spoke to each other again. I really do strongly suggest that if you guys are interested in seeing the dynamic and that relationship and that break between Freud and Jung, I do recommend that you watch the movie A Dangerous Method. I did post the trailer to the module as well. So it is a very modern movie. I need you guys to be a little bit open-minded. It's definitely a rated R movie, but it does an excellent job at explaining who Freud was, who Jung was, why did they disagree, why did they separate, It also does a really great job at showing you real world examples of different techniques that they use in their practices, such as free association and how therapy really worked during that time period. So if you guys do have time, I would definitely recommend that you watch that movie. And if you write a reflection over it, you could get some extra credit for this course. Also, I'm fairly aware that if you've had any other kind of psychology course in any way, there's definitely some heavy criticisms concerning psychoanalysis. Genuinely, there is just not a lot of empirical data to back up Freud and his theories. There's also a lot of criticism related to who Freud was as an individual. So I want you to kind of take it with a grain of salt. Even though we are not using Freud's theories in everyday world and practice currently, please keep in mind that he had a huge impact on the world of psychology. And so it's important to kind of learn where we started. When we move forward to chapter 9, keep in mind we're kind of at the tail end of Freud's work, but we're in between the two world wars. So roughly 1920 to 1940. A good thing to kind of keep in mind is going to be the effects of communism as well as Nazism on psychology. Both of these, communism that was mostly coming out of Russia, and Nazism that was coming out mostly out of kind of Western and Eastern Europe during the time period, really did create kind of a great disruption in the immigration of scholars and professors. So there were several psychologists, as well as different scholars and many other professions who were kind of leaving their home countries in order to have the sense of like academic freedom. So being able to study exactly what they want, when they wanted, and how they wanted. So if they were a professor who was under kind of a Nazi regime, then you would not be able to cite any authors that were not kind of German born. You would not be able to study things that the government did not approve of you. You would have to kind of on your first day of class, stand in front of your class and pledge allegiance to Hitler. And really at this time period, it was being a professor and being a scholar was considered a very kind of dangerous profession. Professors received death threats constantly. They were subject to a large amount of violence and discrimination. So you really do kind of start to see during this time period professors and scholars immigrating to the United States in order to have their sense of kind of academic freedom. So a huge portion of these people, especially in the world of psychology, would be considered Gestalt psychologists. So Gestalt is really coming from that German meaning of whole. So people that are studying Gestalt psychology, we have to kind of understand this fundamental assumption that there are units or wholes of an individual that we need to study. These units and wholes make us who we are today. So I would say typically you're not going to see people today that would consider themselves Gestalt psychologists, but overwhelmingly Gestalt psychology now is used predominantly in kind of IO related things. So you're going to see Gestalt principles and Gestalt ideas coming through in the advertising world. So how people view advertisements and how they kind of conceptualize what they're seeing in advertisements. So overwhelmingly, Gestalt psychology is kind of used in that area today. There are going to be 4 big names that you're going to learn about as part of this movement. Max Wertheimer, Kurt Kofta, Wolfgang Kohler, and Kurt Lewin. These 4 individuals have a ton in common. They were all, for the most part, very good friends. All of them were also immigrated to the United States in order to get that academic freedom. And all of them kind of worked exclusively in this idea of Gestalt psychology. All of them are definitely going to be known as pioneers in this area as well. When we move on to chapter 10, we're still in the kind of the same time period, but what this chapter really kind of does is explain what's happening in the realm of what's other than behavioralism happening, what's other than psychoanalysis, and what is happening other than Gestalt psychology. So I really kind of consider this kind of a catch-all chapter, in that kind of keep in mind that psychoanalysis, behavioralism, Gestalt psychology is all happening at this exact same time. They're all kind of contrasting theories and ways of thinking, but there's also other things happening at the same time period kind of in the world of psychology. So you really start seeing during this time period applied psychology. So what that means is going to be using those theoretical orientations and using those theoretical ideas that behavioralism and psychoanalysis started to bring to the surface, and using it in the real world. So applying those theories to real people in real situations right in front of you. So this came across as in the world of like testing. So Army alpha and beta testing. So testing individuals who wanted to be in the Army in regards to literacy, where they would best fit in the Army, as well as the Ellis Island studies. So as people started immigrating to the United States more and more and more, the US government decided maybe we should start testing these people for kind of intelligence testing, as well as kind of personality testing-ish. And so if a person was deemed kind of inappropriate or not intelligent, according to the Ellis Island studies, this person would be deported back to their home country. So there are definitely pros and cons to this time period for sure. Also, kind of a huge study that's coming from this time period is going to be the Hawthorne study, or maybe you've heard of the Hawthorne effect. So what the Hawthorne study was doing is that there were researchers who went into a plant. They wanted to see why or how lighting would affect kind of workers and their productivity. And what they ended up learning was a whole lot more. So really they learned that people's productivity increased by merely just having a researcher in front of them. So the kind of the overarching theme from the Hawthorne studies that I want you guys to kind of remember is going to be everyone's personality, your behavior, all of those things will change significantly just by having somebody else watch you. So kind of think about how that affects really all kind of psychological studies moving forward. Are people getting real results from psychological studies during this time and now, today? If your behavior, if all of these things change by just having the researcher in front of you, just by knowing that you are part of a psychological study, changes you. So I hope you guys do kind of find that Hawthorne effect a little bit fascinating, and then hopefully you can apply it and think about how this really does change the world moving forward in the world of psychology. Also, a huge portion of this chapter is going to focus in on Piaget versus Vygotsky. I am assuming that many of you have heard of Piaget, maybe not as many of you have heard of Vygotsky, but both of them at the same time period were really kind of working on stages of development and how children develop over time. So Piaget and his theories are very well known and kind of taught, especially if you're kind of in the education world. You're going to hear about Piaget a lot. You're not going to hear so much about Vygotsky, mostly because his research and work was done in Russia. So during this time period, think about how Nazism and communism is really having a tremendous effect. So in the world of communism in Russia during this time period, scholars' work in Russia was not really going out and being disseminated to other areas. So people really didn't know about Vygotsky's work until years and years after he died. But at the same time, he was really working on the exact same thing that Piaget was, and they really were coming up with kind of the same results. So it's kind of interesting to see the differences between the two, considering that both of them were kind of living and working on the same thing in the same time period, but have very different resources and are differently kind of known and celebrated in the world of psychology. Kind of finally, you're definitely going to start to see kind of more branches of psychology being born in this time period. So this chapter does a great job at discussing the origins of social psychology as well as personality theories and how they have changed, as well as the criticisms of these theories during this time period. So I know that was a quick rundown, but as always, I hope you guys learn just a little bit more. If you guys need anything throughout the week, please let me know. I'm happy to help. Have a good one. Bye.